So tonight's we're having our main course, and then we're having a drama which is written by Elizabeth Jones on the suffragettes, the women's franchise, and then we'll have dessert, and after dessert John Tucker, our guest speaker, the principal of Kerry Baptist College, will be speaking to us. So that's the format of the evening. Let's say grace before we continue. E te kaihanga, ka tuku whakamoimiti kua koe mo inai kai. Nō rā te rangi me te whenua me o rawa wahanga katoa I homai kia whai o ranga ai mātou. No te honore, no te kororea. Tēnei te tuku whakawhetai kia koe. Amen. Stay with the first table, so that's gone up to the stage. So continue reading, and Elizabeth and her team are now to present a play for us, written by Elizabeth Jones, and it's about the early church. On your tables, you'll have the list of players, and you'll notice that all of them, a lot of them are forebears of many people here. So wait for the curtains to open.
Good evening. We present a short drama, Votes for Women, 1893. 4 meetings of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, held at the Thames in August, September, October and November. Scene 1 is about some famous women. You will find programs at your tables. Present today in the Good Templar Hall are Mrs. Whitey, Mrs. Lamb, Mrs. Driver, Mrs. Dobbs, Mrs. Smith, Mrs. Donovan. Mrs. Pennell is in the chair. Welcome everyone to our meeting in support of Franchise for Women. We've been so encouraged by the leadership of Kate Shepherd, who has long been our inspiration. We've also been made aware of the work of Mary Muller, who wrote under the nom de plume of Femina in the Nelson Examiner. Also active on the political scene was Mary Mangakahia, the wife of Hamiora Mangakahia, the first Premier of Kotahitanga Māori Parliament. Ladies and gentlemen, I would be pleased if you would now listen to what Mary had to say recently to her colleagues in the Parliament.
E whakamoemiti ana a hau ki ngā honore mema e noho nei. Ki ora koutou katoa, ko te take I mōtene atu ai hau ki te tūma muaki honore me ngā mema honore, ka mahia he turei e tēnei whare kia whakamana ngā wahine ki te pōti mema mō rātou ki te paremata Māori.
In the Parliament, Mary Mangakahia continued. She gave the reasons for presenting her motion supporting votes for women. A very great example to follow.
Ladies, I thought you would be interested in hearing that recording of Mary Mangakahia's speech. And you would be in agreement with the reasons that she gave for the vote.
What a delight to know that she had the courage to speak up
under all those rules.
Dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone, dare to have our purpose firm, dare to make it known.
Now Mary was not only courageous, but she had very logical reasons as to why Maori women should be given the vote, as many of them owned land in their own right.
Do you realise it's only 10 years since we, as married women, were granted the right to own land?
Oh, I'd love to own land if only I could afford it.
Hope springs eternal, Mrs. Smith. When Mary sat down following her speech, I believe that there was a raw, unanimous approval in the House.
Yes, I obey the same laws and I pay the same taxes. Surely I have the right to the same representation that Peter does.
Yes, and many own land who are now widowed. They should be able to vote.
And those of us who own land, we women are knowledgeable, while the men are not.
I hope you are not thinking of anyone in particular, Mrs. Charles.
Not at all, Mrs. Pennell.
I understand that Mary also gave another very good reason why women should have the vote. Men have petitioned the Queen on many issues affecting our land. Mary's argument was that the Queen may listen if those petitions were presented by her Māori sisters, as the Queen is a woman as well.
Mary has made a great contribution, Mrs. Whitehead. Perhaps you should consider writing to the Queen.
I have here a quotation from the Nelson Examiner. How long are we women to remain wholly unrepresented, the wholly unrepresented body of the people? Women's eyes turn in hope, nay trust, to some leading spirit who will not fail them.
Scene 2, A Fishy Story. The monthly meeting of the Women's Christian Temperance Union on the 14th of September 1893. In Wellington, Sir John Hall, one-time Premier of New Zealand, moved the second reading of the Women's Franchise Bill. He said,
"It gives me great pleasure to announce that a large majority of the House have affirmed the clause in the electoral bill giving the franchise to the women of the colony. I believe that the House should read this a second time. It is most important, in fact, a necessity, that women of this colony should obtain the franchise because they will exercise a conservative influence on society."
Mr. Taylor, one of the candidates for the Thames seat, supported the bill. Henry Fish, on the other side, in his usual rough and vigorous fashion, condemned the principle of women's suffrage. He loudly declared that the bill was a damned waste of time.
Well, ladies, in Mr. Taylor, we have a gentleman who is supportive of our cause.
But Mr. Fish, the talking fish, I believe they call it.
We all remember the famous Billingsgate fish market of London. The joke around Parliament is that we used to go to Billingsgate for our fish, and now we go to fish for our Billingsgate.
And apart from his deplorable language, I believe he's been involved in some disgraceful fraud.
Ladies, we are not here today to denigrate, but we are here today to pray for Mr. Taylor, our representative in Parliament. He is certainly one of the leading spirits in whom we have hope and trust. Let us pray for him and for Sir John Hall, who has chosen to champion and to lead our cause in the parliamentary leadership. Let us pray for the passage of this bill.
Well, bless my soul, as I live and breathe, am I to believe there is hope on the horizon?
Yes, there is hope, dear. Thank you, Mrs. Whitehead.
Ladies, please, shall we pray first and then we can have our tea?
Scene 3. Oh dear, there's work to do. The monthly meeting of the Women's Christian Temperance Union at the Thames on October the 19th, 1893.
Welcome to our meeting today. It is a great privilege for us to remember that exactly 1 month ago today, on the 19th of September, the electoral bill was passed. But the work is not over. In fact, it is just beginning.
You mean we have more to do?
One thing I must do is talk to my neighbour, who I regret to say is rather timid and doesn't understand the true mission of women in regard to politics.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yes, we must make sure that our women here do not decline to make the most of the privilege offered.
Yes, what we need is to educate and encourage our women to be on their guard.
Because you will find quite a few very willing to mislead or even betray.
Yes. We must be aware of men making deceptive promises and wooing us with kind words.
As if they've ever been found to woo us in any other relations of life.
Yes, we'll be enfranchised, in a technical sense made the political equals of men.
And independent in thought and action.
You mean we won't just be voting machines when we cast our ballots, will we?
That's right, but we must make sure that we vote for the right men.
There is a lot I would rather not say about some of the men in Parliament who have disgraced the Parliament and have let down those who have voted for them and sent them there.
It's definitely persons of good character that this country needs.
What a great responsibility we have. We might have to be content with little to achieve much.
You mean make our influence felt gradually?
Rome wasn't built in a day.
Very true, Mary Annie. I know. Evolution, not revolution.
Yes. Let's plan now to ensure that every woman in the Thames is on the electoral roll, and each one has placed her name on the roll and is ready to vote.
and last seen. The monthly meeting of the Women's Christian Temperance Union at the Thames on November the 8th, 1893.
Mr. Taylor, our candidate for the forthcoming election, ladies and gentlemen, friends, please give a special welcome to Mr. Taylor. Ladies and gentlemen, the Electoral Act has been passed. The gentlemen from the Prohibition League have asked me to chair this part of the meeting, and I sincerely hope that all the women of the district will exercise their vote.
We have just one more thing to do, and that is...
We have been delighted with your leadership over these past months, and with this bouquet we express our gratitude. Thank you.
You, each one of you, have worked tirelessly and have committed yourselves to work for this cause. And because of that, we have achieved that goal. But it is only the beginning. It is the beginning of a new chapter for the women of this great country.
Ladies, let's start work right now and distribute these leaflets. The election is but 20 days away. Once you have registered, get someone else, another woman, to register with you. Let's do it! Yay.
An obstacle, mists were rising fast, the sun was sinking low, and a sad inspiration came as sudden winds do blow. An obstacle, an obstacle, an obstacle, an obstacle, an obstacle, an obstacle, an obstacle. I took my hat, I took my stick, my load I settled fair. I approached that awful incubus with an absent-minded air. I walked directly through him as if he wasn't there. No obstacle, no obstacle, no obstacle, no obstacle, no obstacle, no obstacle, no!
Elizabeth Jones started planning for this weekend. Elizabeth is one of these very capable, very, very talented ladies, and she has never, in her 80-odd years, learned to delegate. She has done everything for this weekend with not very much help at all. She wrote this play. She resourced it all from the computer, but everything that was spoken was something from a suffragette from 150 years ago. She put hours and hours of work into it. Elizabeth, we're having a wonderful weekend, and we thank you.
A wonderful team to work with. There were many, many helpers. Not quite true that I did it all on my own, because there's one person I want to especially thank, and that's over there, Miffy Will. When we two get our heads together, look out. Thank you so much. Thank you.
It's my privilege to invite Dr. John Tucker, the principal of Kerry Baptist College, to come and have a keynote address tonight. When I was at college, at Kerry College, John was just before me. So, and he was a lecturer there when I've been doing some post-grad stuff as well. So I keep an eye on him. So now he's going to share his knowledge on something about Thames Baptist. John.
Thanks, Chris. Ka mea ihu ko a hautakura e pono, ki ora, i hei Māori ora. E honore he karori e kiti atua, maunga rongo ki te kenea. Tēnā koutou ki a tātou tini mati. Haere, haere, haere. Ko rātou ki a rātou, ko tātou ki a tātou, ko tātou e umura. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Hi everyone. I just wanted to say first of all that Jesus is the way, the truth and the life, and may God have all the glory and honour in our lives and in this gathering, and in Thames Baptist Church, and may his peace, his goodwill be on the land here. My name's John, as Chris has said, and it's a real pleasure to be here with you for the sesquicentennial celebration. You don't often get to use that word every day, sesquicentennial, 150 years. It's a wonderful milestone and a real privilege to be here with you as you celebrate together. 150 years ago this month, on the 6th of May, 1869, Thames Baptist Church opened a building for worship on land that was gifted to it, donated by two Māori chiefs, Te Hotereni Kaipiri and Rapana Maunganoa. And in the context of the day, that was a remarkable act of grace, because on the very same day, 6th of May, 1869, government troops were invading the Urewera, ostensibly to punish Tuhoi, the local Māori, because of their alleged sheltering of Te Kuti and his rebel forces. And so these three columns of colonial soldiers made their way through Urewera, descending on villages where inhabitants were killed, crops were destroyed, food supplies were eradicated. Māori were being punished, and a signal was being sent that discontent with government policy would not be tolerated. Now, the land wars, that period of our history, the legislation that followed, it stripped Māori of millions and millions of acres of their land. Pakeha stole Māori land in a colossal way. And so against that backdrop, you have these two Māori chiefs gifting land to the people of Thames Baptist Church as a house of worship, a remarkable act of grace. And I say that really because I think it is grace, the remarkable grace of God to us in Jesus Christ, that has shaped Baptist life and Baptist history right from the beginning. One theologian by the name of Stephen Holmes, he says that Baptists, more than most Christian traditions, have been relentlessly focused on mission, on sharing the good news of God's remarkable grace with others. And he pins that down to the Baptist emphasis, this radical emphasis that Baptists have had through the centuries on the immediate lordship of Jesus Christ over every individual person and every local church. He argues that if Jesus is Lord over every individual, if he alone has the right to command the individual conscience, if no one can enter into the kingdom of God apart from first hearing the call of Jesus in the gospel, then evangelism, mission, is a priority. But then, if the ultimate authority over every local gathered church is the risen Christ amongst the gathered people, and if by implication the authority of the state and other powers is therefore limited, and there's a boundary beyond which the state cannot transgress, then proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom means necessarily resisting those expressions of force, resisting those structures, social, political structures, that violate God's will for people and for his people. And so you have this DNA of Baptist life, this DNA of Baptist history, which fundamentally takes this, I think, and I'm saying tonight, a double helix structure. Two strands. On the one hand, Baptists have always said that mission in terms of evangelism, using our words to share the good news of God's grace to us in Jesus, that's really important. But equally, so too should we be engaging in mission in the sense of social justice, resisting those systems and structures that demean and dehumanize and hurt people. And when you look at Baptist history, you see both of these strands through the centuries. On the one hand, the call to evangelism,
to proclaiming the grace of God by our words. You see that in the very first Baptist leaders. I think of Thomas Helwys, who was the first Baptist pastor in England. He insisted that his refugee congregation should return to England from Amsterdam in the face of persecution, with the real prospect of danger, because, in his words, thousands of innocent souls in their own country are perishing for lack of instruction. And you see this impulse to evangelism in the life and the ministry of Johann Gerhard Oncken, who was a German Baptist leader. His vision, his missionary vision, shaped Baptist life right across continental Europe. And his famous motto was, every Baptist a missionary. In fact, he even went so far as to say that every church member in a Baptist church should have an answer to the question, what are you doing? What are you going to do to serve Jesus? And then, he insisted, it should be written down, it should be recorded in writing, so that you could be held accountable for your response. Evangelism, right at the heart of the Baptist vision, Baptist history. But equally so, this other strand that runs through our history, you see that, this call to social justice, this call to proclaiming the kingdom of God through our actions, through our deeds. You see that in the life of people like William Carey, the Baptist missionary in India. He led the campaign to abolish sati, the burning of widows on their husbands' funeral pyres. He saw that practice and did what he could to lead the charge against it. And then I think of William Knibb, the Baptist missionary to Jamaica, who played a crucial role in the abolition of slavery right through the British Empire. Martin Luther King Jr., Baptist minister, leading the civil rights movement in the United States. It goes on and on. So you see these two strands, this double helix. This is the Baptist way. We feel the imperative to preach the gospel with words and with actions. Evangelism, social justice. And I guess what I want to say tonight is that when you flick through the pages of the history of Thames Baptist Church, you see the same double helix. You see these two strands. On the one hand, evangelism. It's always been important here. Right back at the very beginning, before Thames Baptist Church even had an official minister, it was employing William Daddy Mason, a long-haired, elderly, venerable figure, to visit the miners in the hills behind Thames. 2 days a week, he would make his way well into his 70s with a big bag of Bibles, distributing those Bibles to any men who would take one, who could read. Some of the early ministers, like Josiah Hinton, set about setting up preaching stations outside of Thames, Paeroa and elsewhere, because they wanted to see the word spread. I think of the 1890s in this church. There was an evangelistic Bible class set up for local Chinese, miners who would become market gardeners here. Now that might not seem particularly remarkable, but when you think about the climate of the day, the prejudice there was in New Zealand society in the 1890s towards Asians generally and Chinese in particular, it was a remarkable act on the part of this church. I think of the newspapers of the time. Here's the New Zealand Truth. They often expressed concern about what they called the yellow peril. And so the newspaper here says, anybody with eyes to see, ears to hear, and above all noses to smell, knows quite well how rapid is the progress of the yellow brute. He is a dirty yellow brute of a stinking scrofulous alien. This was the popular newspapers of our day, of the day in the 1890s. And it wasn't just the newspaper, it was political leaders too. People that actually spoke in support, at least publicly, of suffrage. People like Richard Seddon, who became the longest serving Prime Minister or Premier of this country. He compared the Chinese to animals and wasn't alone in doing so. He said Europeans are vastly superior to Chinese, and there was, in his words, about the same distinction between a European and a Chinaman as that between a Chinaman and a monkey. This is one of our political leaders. This was the environment of the day. And yet the people of Thames Baptist Church said that their Chinese neighbours were children of God for whom Christ had died. This commitment to proclaiming the gospel to everyone, it runs right through the 20th century here at Thames. I think of the 1930s, the church was running evangelistic events on Sunday nights after their Sunday evening service at the local theatre. The church was helping to host evangelistic tent crusades with local or itinerant ministers who came as evangelists. And on one occasion, it was the Reverend Joseph Carlyle. He spoke at a sustained tent crusade over a number of weeks, and it rained every day for 25 days of the mission. And according to one lament, it was very cold throughout that period of time. But the tent crusade went on. Such was the commitment to sharing the good news of God's remarkable grace to us in Jesus. You fast forward to the 1990s, and another snapshot from the family album of this church would be Auntie Ada Mackay, who I've read about. I wish I could have met. I understand she passed away just 2 or 3 years ago. She would routinely bring along to church a van load of children from the town where Manaia, where she was located, and where she ran a small group outreach for local Māori. And then, of course, there are many pages in the history of this church that record a strong commitment to overseas mission. And there are people here tonight, of course, who have played their part in that story. So this church has a long history of seeking to proclaim the gospel of God's grace through their words, through evangelism. But that strand is interwoven with another strand here, a commitment to proclaiming the gospel through deed, through fighting against those systems and structures and patterns that are dehumanizing people. And let me again give you just a few quick snapshots from this church's history. Back in the late 19th century, New Zealand had a number of social problems, but one of the main social problems was, as no doubt you can guess, the overconsumption of alcohol. Anthony Trollope visited New Zealand in 1873, and he recorded his experience of the colony in these words: "I must especially observe one point as to which the New Zealand colonist imitates his brethren and ancestors at home, and far surpasses his Australian rival. He is very fond of getting drunk." In New Zealand, conviction rates for being drunk and disorderly were 5 times higher than back in Britain. New Zealand had a problem. The demon drink, as many people called it, really did cause considerable suffering and social misery in this country. And it's understandable why, because alcohol was just so easily accessible. You could get it so easily. In Thames, back then, in the late 19th century, there were over 100 pubs at one point, fighting for business. Over 100 pubs in Thames. So it's not surprising that people, women and men, within churches like Thames Baptist, right across New Zealand, spearheaded what is now, historically, was a massive crusade, an incredible campaign to try and prohibit the sale of alcohol. They wanted to limit access to alcohol. Now, we might... on this photo, the notice board to the side of the old church building, can you see that? You probably can't. But it says, "The enemy of the race, alcoholic liquor." It was the enemy of the race. It was wet damnations, the way some people put it. Well, this great campaign ultimately was displaced by the Great Depression in the 1930s.
Prohibition the push for prohibition ran from the 1880s to the 1920s, but by 1930, New Zealand was facing another crisis. This economic depression that afflicted the world was felt very keenly here. And it's really hard to overemphasise just how much of a shadow it cast over New Zealand. At one point in New Zealand, unemployment accounted for 40% of the male workforce. 40%. The suffering was significant. The poet Rex Fairburn, he talks about one man being driven mad, being driven insane by the inability to feed his children. He writes about a widow and her child dying unreported of starvation. There were heart-rending advertisements appearing in the newspapers of the day, not unlike this one here. Can you see the one at the very top? It says this: adoption for wee baby boy, undernourished, times are hard, needs mothering. Will someone give him a chance? This church responded to the crisis. The minister of the day, the Reverend Alfred Fair, he took the position of welfare officer in Thames and also served as secretary to the Relief Drive Committee. I haven't been able to get into the archives to see just how far the response went of churches like Thames, but I know throughout New Zealand, other Baptist churches and churches of other Christian traditions, they started soup kitchens and were forced to start asking big, hard questions about the economic order and the social polity of our nation. Then flick ahead to the 1960s, and the minister of this church was a certain Bert Whitten. And Bert Whitten was, at the same time as he was serving here, he was the editor of the New Zealand Baptist magazine. And in his role as editor for that magazine, he was outspoken in his vigorous opposition to New Zealand's involvement in the Vietnam War. Now, it would be fair to say that at that particular point in time, Baptists weren't particularly outspoken on the issue, probably because we were quite divided politically on the merits of the case. But Whitten pleaded with his fellow Baptists to speak out, and this is what he said. He urged us, Baptists, to crawl out of your funkhole of seeming unconcern, and in the name of Christ, say something definite and uncompromising and Christian on behalf of peace, justice, and humanity. By our persistent silence about this war, he said, we deny all the New Testament principles upon which we profess to stand. He believed that Baptists in New Zealand, through our emphasis on evangelism, were therefore neglecting social justice. He was concerned that the two strands were no longer in tension. Now, that may have been the case in the 1960s, but you certainly couldn't bring that charge to the doors of Thames Baptist Church in recent decades. Because as I've read the histories that Don Dixon wrote and others, I mean, it is a remarkable story. The story of community ministries emerging from Thames Baptist Church from the 1990s onwards. The list of ministries is extraordinary. I just haven't seen anything like it. Emergency housing for vulnerable young people, training schemes for the unemployed, a childcare centre, a toy library, a craft group, an exercise group, cooking classes, language classes, counselling services, marriage courses, parenting courses, a budgeting service, a food bank, community meals, advocacy. The list goes on and on and on. So you have these two strands, word and deed, evangelism, social justice, like the two strands of DNA running through the history of Thames Baptist Church, through the decades. And they're both important. Both strands need to be held together. And when you think about the future of this church, when you think about the future of the church in New Zealand generally,
I think it's going to be increasingly important to hold these two strands together. Think about the shape of New Zealand society at the moment. Last year, the McCrindle Research Organisation published a report on faith and belief in New Zealand. I don't know if you saw the report. It's a really significant document, I think, and really interesting, because it highlights a number of what the report calls faith blockers. What are the significant obstacles preventing people from putting their faith in Jesus, or even considering the claims of Christ? You know what they are? According to the research, the primary objections that people have to the Christian faith in this country today are the church's posture towards homosexuals, the church's attitude towards women, and the church's abuse of children. It's just 3 of the faith blockers that were identified in that report. So the primary objection to Christianity today, it seems, is not really intellectual. People aren't so much these days asking the question, is the Bible reliable? Are miracles possible? Is the faith reasonable? The primary objection, it seems to be, at least from this research, is moral. The average Kiwi looks at Christianity, looks at the church and thinks, it's oppressive, it's destructive, it marginalises powerless people, it hurts people, it's unjust. And so I think one of the most significant and effective missional responses is to simply be a people who both by our words and by our actions embody the compassion, the justice, the grace of God, particularly towards those who are the most vulnerable. Can I finish with a quote from Nancy Ammerman, reflecting on Baptist life and Baptist history? This is what she says. The early Baptists led the fight for religious liberty. But few today can fully comprehend what it meant to proclaim that persons, otherwise despised and rejected, should take on the rights and responsibilities previously reserved only for privileged people. The real affront of Baptist ideas was the way they challenged the very basis of the state's authority with their assertion that everyone deserved the same privileges. As the culture is struggling again with the demands of pluralism, it may be our task to speak up for those too easily cast aside. In short, it's a great time to be a Baptist. Our cultures need us now more than ever. They need us to speak up for the rights of people it would be easier to put down. Amen. I should have prefaced my talk by saying we've just seen a really engaging and quite witty and charming presentation. This is going to be a little bit more sort of, serious. So that was a real faux pas on my part, but there you go. Some reflections on the history of Thames Baptist Church as just one community, one family of the wider movement and story of the Baptist movement in our world. Thank you.
We have on the program said that if possible, or if you're able to, or wanted to, become a period dress.
Oh, yes.
And Elizabeth has teed up a couple of judges. So, and they're aware, so I'm sure they've been looking around as to who they were their favourites. They're now talking amongst themselves. Brian and Zoe, we've got to come up and share your findings.
I thought they were all going to run away. Would you like them across the front? Yeah.
Okay, can we have all the women in period year dressed across the front, and the men in period year across the front as well? Just don't come up the stairs if you know, stay down.
We might just have to take an initiative. They are coming. Some of them are coming. Few of them are coming. How many are you wanting? Are we under instructions? Well, first of all, we should congratulate these people on their splendid attire and their wonderful presentation. Thank you. And, oh, Pat, yes, it wouldn't be a complete line-up without you. You and your wonderful hat. I thought Chris was part of the competition, but I decided that undertakers would be excluded from tonight. He had no time. Yes. So Zoe, you have a winner. Yes. It was consultative. You were going to announce.
Well, I may be punished for this later, but I believe it's Terry Rebel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We just have to say Kerry always dresses like that. That concludes the formal part of this evening, but please stay, keep talking, keep remembering, keep thinking back on the past and looking back at those moments. But also think about what John was saying. We're at a crossroads, really. We've always been involved in evangelism and in community ministries. And community ministries at the moment is a little bit of a crossroads as to what to do. We're now 30 years since we set up Thames Community Baptist Community Ministries. And we're looking at saying, what's changed in society at the moment? What's changed in Thames that we need to look at? Where are the gaps that have not been filled by other agencies? Many of the things that we set up are now being run by, either in the case of childcare, being run by businesses. A lot of the social work stuff we were doing is now being done by non-government organisations, NGOs. So where are the gaps? Where are the things that we should be Christ to the people in the community? So we're looking at that now, saying, where are we going? What are we going to do? Where does God want us to work? So the challenge that we received from John today was very timely. The stories we heard this morning from the various people who spoke is timely to remind us where we've been. But this is not, I'm not an undertaker, this is not the end of the story. This is just the first 150 years of a story which is going to be long past that. Long past when many of us are no longer here. Thames Baptist is still going to be here, still doing the work, because it is, as John said, it's our DNA to be involved in evangelism, involved in social action. And so, if you've got thoughts on that, we would love to hear from Kerry as the chairperson of the Ebenezer Trust, Paul Sylvester, myself and Colin McLaren and Kylie Gunn are all involved in that, and we'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on where you see community ministries going in the future in Thames. So please, don't keep it to yourself, tell us. That'll be awesome. Please stay, as I said, we've got this for the night. And if you're still here at 10 o'clock in the morning, we're moving up to the church for the service. John is again speaking. He's our guest speaker at the service. So please, we'd love to see you there as well. Thank you.